This is my link tree here. If anyone's ever interested in seeing any of my other content. I do dope shit. This is my link tree, Ace Ford. My socials, my Instagram. I like to take photos, my photography, whatever. I put them up on there. I'm sure most of you already see my TikTok. Just clips of all my content, really. Twitch, as you know, if you're watching this right now, theEnthralledHistorian. But I do have a podcast on Spotify, a self-titled podcast, the Ace Ford podcast. That's exclusively on Spotify. I have another podcast that's on like everything. Not everything, but most of the major podcast platforms: Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor. Actually, I don't even know if Anchor exists anymore. And we got a Facebook page for that podcast. Facebook page for an online thrift store that I'm in partnership with. The Cozy Corner, just some dope content that I worked on YouTube with a fellow content creator. And a 3 episode special podcast on Spotify exclusively, The Lost Files. Did a 9-hour interview with poet Lost Child. A lot of stuff wrapped around civil rights and also adoption. He was placed for adoption at birth. I don't think he's ever had the opportunity to meet his birth parents. But again, I haven't actually talked to him since I worked on that project with him. He actually has all his content he puts under a hashtag. Find Lost Child. Where's Lost Child might be another one. But that's actually an indicator of his personality. If you're fortunate enough to get to interact with Poet Lost Child, like, cherish that shit, cause my guy is gone quick, and when he's gone, he's gone. So if you've had the opportunity to interact with him, be a part of his life or his art in any kind of fashion, you just cherish that while it's there. Until it's not. But that's up there. That's something I'm really happy with. So, I was like going over the stream that I did last night, and there was a couple things that I forgot to show you. The one thing that I wanted to look at was, I was talking about Holy Island when there was a blockade by the Royalists, and the captain of that castle or that island there um, wrote a letter to the Earl of Manchester, the second Earl of Manchester, asking for supplies and provisions. In which Parliament sent John Fenwick and Major John Fenwick and his cavalry regime. That castle actually. Let me. Maybe it's. Let me see. I think it might be on here. It's not on this list. It's Holy Island. We gotta find the name of the actual castle. Castle on Holy Island. That's it. I knew I definitely wrote that down somewhere. So anyway, let's check this out. This is the castle here. Lindisfarne Castle. Lindisfarne. Yo, this is a dope ass picture. What's interesting about this island, we'll have to look at a map in a second. Alright, Paul. What's that down there? No. I wonder if that's like some sort of like wall or was part of some wall or structure there. Damn, that's pretty as fuck. Apparently this was like, you see how like all these little I guess islands are out here. Apparently you were able to walk to this island and castle, and when it was low tide. I don't know if that's still the case. Probably not with global warming, man. This is a fire photo. Kevin Cook 180 photography. That's a fire photo. You took a fire photo, sir. Man, one day I'm gonna make it to England. I'm definitely gonna make it there. I'm gonna take my film camera with me. Speaking of going to England one day, I actually put pictures of this castle up on Facebook, and I had put it into like some of the historic history communities that I'm a part of. And at the bottom of the one post about this castle in particular, I said, I'm gonna make it to England one day, and it didn't really get much interaction, but whatever. Um, but one person, top contributor for that page, uh, made us think about me using the wrong form of two. I put two O's instead of one when I said I wanted to go to England. Haters, man. I wonder where these nice rooms are at because the castle looks like it's pretty much in ruins, right? I guess not. Look at that wall. That's dope. Oh shit, look at the pathway there. That's pretty cool. That's a fire photo. This is a fire photo. If I could get this same shot on film in black and white, bro, forget about it. Anyway, that's the castle that John Fenwick went to relieve, and he did bring some relief, but John Clement kind of exaggerated the way he put it, because the castle wasn't captured. There was just a blockade, and John Fenwick didn't show up and save the day and free the castle from the royalists like some Disney cartoon movie or some shit. But he did bring some relief. But the blockade, I believe, for a few weeks, quite a few weeks, after Major John Fenwick's efforts, the blockade continued. Holy Island is actually pretty dope because It has some like um I think monks like for years had laid claim to it and fought for it, but for them it was always a losing battle. Um the island was originally home to a monastery which was which was destroyed during the Viking invasion, but reestablished as a priory following the Norman conquest of England. Other notable sites built on the island are St. Mary the Virgin Parish Church, originally built in 635 and restored in 1860. The monasteries that was destroyed by the Viking invasion, uh, that's pretty crazy story, because they have it like I I read somewhere where they described like the Vikings coming in on like legit dragons, like flying in the air and shit. Uh, I'm trying to find when the Vikings came. Oh, here we go. In this year, fierce, foreboding omens came over the land of the Northumbrians, and the wretched people shook. There were excessive whirlwinds, lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the sky. These signs were followed by great famine, and a little after those, that same year on the 6th idols of January, the ravaging of wretched heathen men destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne. The generally accepted date for the Viking raid on Lindisfarne is the 8th of June, which is the date given by the annals of Lindisfarne when better sailing weather would favor coastal raids. Let's see if we can find it during the Civil War. What would it be? Would it be Middle Ages? Oh, here we go. This is what I was looking for. It is accessible at low tide by a modern causeway and an ancient pilgrim's path that both run over sand and mud flats, and which are covered with water at high tide. That was what I wanted to show you. There was something else though. I can't remember now. That's gonna bug me. I know there was one other thing. Anyway, if I think of it, I'll come back to it. Oh, there. I do need to. I do need to make note. Because I discovered on last night's stream that during the time of like the restoration of the crown, which happened in 1660-ish, although Major John Fenwick like was in the army and was present for the execution of Charles I, there was like an immunity act that Charles II put into place, which was like an effort to help restore the crown. Major John Fenwick benefited from that immunity act. But what I discovered on last night's stream was that Major John Fenwick's father was actually a member of that last parliament that was taking care of the trial of those involved in the execution of Charles I, and part of the parliament that worked with the king and negotiated with the king to come up with the Immunity Act. So, I mean, I'm sure he would have been swept in with the Immunity Act anyway, because most people were. King Charles was only really interested in getting justice on the direct participants of the execution of his father. So Major John Fenwick probably would have been safe anyway, but it definitely helped that his father was part of that parliament that negotiated with King Charles II. I'm really discovering more and more about like all the wars that was happening, the civil wars and all of that. So there's still a lot that I don't know. But what I can say right now, just to help us with diving into this page, I think what kicked all this off is when King Charles I became king. I guess we should look this up. There's no reason we can't. When he became king, he just basically decided to stop meeting with or calling Parliament. Stop meeting with Parliament. And he basically was just going to do whatever the fuck he wanted to do. He was king. He felt like it was his divine right as king that he didn't have to answer to or work with the people. Yeah, they did try to get him to marry uh this chick, Maria Anna, I think Queen of Spain at the time, right? No, Holy Roman Empress and Queen of Hungary and Bohemia by her marriage to Ferdinand the Third. After his secession in 1625, Charles quarreled with the English Parliament, which sought to curb his royal prerogative. He believed in the divine right of kings and was determined to govern according to his own conscience. Many of his subjects opposed his policies, in particular the levying of taxes without parliamentary consent, and perceived his actions as those of a tyrannical absolute monarch. His religious policies, coupled with his marriage to a Roman Catholic, generated antipathy and mistrust from reformed religious groups such as the English Puritans and Scottish Covenanters. Which, interesting enough, I believe the Covenanters ended up helping King Charles II later on actually get back to restoring the crown. Who thought his views too Catholic? He supported high church Anglican ecclesiastics and failed to aid continental Protestant forces successfully during the 30 Years' War. His attempts to force the Church of Scotland to adopt high Anglican practices led to the Bishops' Wars, strengthened the position of the English and Scottish parliaments, and helped precipitate his own downfall. From 1642, Charles fought the armies of the English and Scottish parliaments in the English Civil War. After his defeat in 1645 at the hands of the Parliamentary New Model Army, that was the army that Major John Fenwick was a major in for a cavalry regiment. He fled he fled north from his base at Oxford. Charles surrendered to the Scottish force, and after lengthy negotiations between the English and Scottish parliaments, he was handed over to the Long Parliament in London. Charles refused to accept his captors' demands for a constitutional monarchy and temporarily escaped captivity in November of 1647. Re-imprisoned on the Isle of Wits, whatever. He forged an alliance with Scotland, but by the end of 1648, the New Model Army had consolidated its control over England. Charles was tried, convicted, and executed for high treason in January of 1649. The monarchy was abolished, and the Commonwealth of England was established as a republic. The monarchy was restored in 1660 with Charles's son, Charles II, as king. But like I was saying last night, like at the beginning of like when you start this whole story, you're like, yeah, like fuck this guy. He just basically just said like I'm gonna do what I want. Y'all are gonna give me your money without any say in any of this, and y'all are just my subjects. And it caused a lot of strife. Distractions. Um, it caused a lot of strife, and they all went to war with each other and all that. But by the time it gets to the end of the war, or at least the end of that part of the war, and the King Charles I is captured and tried, is on trial, um, which I guess I'm about to get to this. Uh, he actually wanted his trial to be done. He wanted a parliamentary trial because he knew actually that most of Parliament, despite everything that had happened in the last 10 years, um, that most of Parliament actually was against everything that was happening. They didn't want to try the king and didn't want to prosecute the king. I guess the right way to say it. And they definitely didn't want to execute the king or have anything to do with that. Which is where everything just kind of gets real fuzzy, because um uh, there's actually a term for it of what happened. But once everyone decided or figured out that the powers that be at the time, I guess, um were they wanted to execute the king. Most of Parliament was like not for it. Uh and I don't know. Rump Parliament. The Rump Parliament was the English Parliament after Colonel Thomas Pride had commanded his soldiers on the 6th of December 1648 to purge the Long Parliament of members against the Grandee's intention to try King Charles I for high treason. Rump normally means the high end or backside of a mammal. Its use meaning remnant was first recorded in the above context in English in 1649. Um, Pride's Purge. That's what I was looking for. Pride's Purge is the name commonly given to an event that took place on the 6th of December 1648, when soldiers prevented members of Parliament considered hostile to the new model army from entering the House of Commons of England. Despite defeat in the First English Civil War, Charles I retained significant political power. This allowed him to create an alliance with the Scots Covenanters and parliamentarian moderates to restore him to the English throne. The result was the 1648 Second English Civil War, in which he was defeated once again. Convinced only his removal could end the conflict, senior commanders of the New Model Army took control of London on the 5th of December. The next day, soldiers commanded by Colonel Thomas Pride forcibly excluded from the Long Parliament those MPs viewed as their opponents and arrested 45. The purge cleared the way for the execution of Charles in January of 1649 and establishment of the Protectorate in 1653. It is considered the only recorded military coup d'etat, I think they say coup d'etat, in English history. I don't know how to say that. But, like I was saying, by the time you get to the end of the story, like, the good guys become the bad guys because the good guys do the very thing that they were fighting against the bad guys for doing, right? Charles I said he believed he had divine royal rights, and he stopped fucking with Parliament. And that's what made all this happen. And then when Parliament went to war with him and won and captured him and wanted to kill him, they realized that, like, the only way they were going to stop, really, when he escaped after the first Civil War and then kicked off another mini war, the Second Civil War, that was when they were like, we gotta the only thing that's going to stop this from happening again is if we kill him. And they knew that the ones who wanted that knew that Parliament most of the people wasn't going to go for that. So they took siege of London. They arrested 45 innocent people just on the basis of them knowing that they would vote in opposition to them on the execution of the king. A few people escaped getting arrested and fled and went into exile, fled the country even. King Charles the First, his son, which became King Charles II, he went into exile too, and he had some loyal friends who went with him, which we'll get into who they are later, because they're a part of the New Jersey story. They arrested 45. Some went into exile. And that left only like a small percentage of Parliament left. And even like a good quarter of those didn't show up because they felt like what they did with Pride's purge was they weren't for it. They thought it was wrong. So I think like maybe upwards to 19 Parliament members decide not to show up, who were actually in favor of executing the king, but didn't fuck with how they sieged London and the House of Commons and arrested people and wouldn't let certain members come in that was going to vote in opposition to executing the king. When the First English Civil War began in 1642, the vast majority on both sides believed a well-ordered monarchy was divinely mandated. They disagreed on what well-ordered meant and who held ultimate authority in their clerical affairs. Royalists generally supported a Church of England governed by bishops appointed by and answerable to the king. Puritans believed he was answerable to the leaders of the church appointed by their congregations. In 1646, most parliamentarians assumed military defeat would force Charles I to comply with their terms, but his refusal to make any substantial concessions frustrated allies and opponents alike. He successfully exploited divisions among his opponents to negotiate an alliance with Scots and English Presbyterians, which led to the 1648 Second English Civil War, although quickly suppressed. Parliament continued negotiations with Charles, but by the beginning of November, the army had lost its patience. On the 10th of November, Henry Ireton presented the draft remonstrance to the Army General Council, which set out a constitutional vision of a state with Charles replaced by an elected monarch. While the council was initially divided on whether to approve it, they did so on the 15th when it seemed Parliament was about to restore Charles unconditionally. They decided to act after intercepting secret messages from Charles stating any concessions he made were intended only to facilitate his escape. Which, well, he did the first time. Alright, this is important here. On the 1st of December, Fairfax ordered Charles be taken from his parliamentary guards on the Isle of Wight and moved to Hurst Castle on the mainland. The next day, the new model army occupied key positions in London to prevent the interference from Presbyterian elements of the London trained bands. Fairfax established his headquarters in Whitehall near the Houses of Parliament. After an all-day meeting on the 5th of December, Parliament voted by 129 to 83 to continue negotiating with the king, right? So, 129 of parliamentary members was voting for the continuation of negotiating with the king. I didn't have to say it that way. But way more. 129 to 83. Way more was in favor of continuing to try to work things out with the king. Next morning, acting under orders from Ireton, a detachment under Colonel Thomas Pride and Sir Hardress Waller ordered the trained bands who normally guarded the house to withdraw. So, normal security got them up out of there. They then took up position on the stairs leading into the chamber, supported by cavalry from Nathaniel Rich's regiment of horse. As the MPs arrived, Pride checked their names against a list of those considered enemies of the army, assisted by Lord Grey of Groby, who helped identify them. The list contained the names of 180 of the 470 eligible members, including all 129 who the day before had voted to continue negotiations with the king. Some prominent opponents, such as Denzel Hollis, fled the city. A total of 140 MPs were refused entry by Pride, 45 of whom were arrested and held in 2 inns in the Strand. Many later complained of rough treatment from their new model guards, who blamed them for their arrears of pay. Most were released in late December, but former parliamentarian generals William Waller and Richard Brown were held for nearly 3 years. This left around 156 members present in London, with another 40 or so absent elsewhere, which became known as the Rump Parliament. While assumed to be supportive of the army, this was not necessarily the case. Many were horrified by Pride's actions, and more than 80 of those who remained in London refused to attend. The vote to end negotiation with Charles was taken by only 83 MPs. So they literally took siege, and every step of the way to the execution just cut more and more people out of the parliament, that all on the basis of they were going to go against what they really wanted. And what they really wanted, what Oliver Cromwell really wanted, was the king to be executed. So these three guys were actually like at the execution. They literally, Hacker literally walked the king, like he was with the entourage of guards and people that the perp walk. He was with the people who led the king to where he was going to be executed. All three of them say that they were just doing their duties. They were doing what they were supposed to do under orders as soldiers, which is legitimate. It's legit, right? But there's first of all, like I said before, Colonel Hanks and Colonel Payer. These are, I can't really say that they're typos. They could be. But there's questions with these two names on multiple sources. For one, the Payer, Colonel Payer, his name is spelled so many different ways. And those two, either Hanks, his real name is Colonel Hercules Hunks, and he actually refused to sign the execution warrant, although he was participating in it. And Oliver Cromwell called him a forward peevish fellow or something along those lines. Called him a coward for that, and actually forged his name. So we know Colonel Hercules Hunks, his name was forged, which actually worked in his favor later on when he was on trial. And Lieutenant Colonel Payer, his name was either forged as well, or it was added later, which actually I'm leaning towards the added later side more, because there might have actually been one or two other people who were actually there who had their name taken off or was afraid to sign it, and then Lieutenant Colonel Payer's name got put in place of it because he was there. And of course, Hacker, he almost was able to be considered in with the Immunity Act. And the only thing that sealed his fate was the fact that Colonel Hunks snitched on him and said he was one of the only ones there out of all of us who were willing to sign that execution warrant. And that, along with the fact that Hacker actually still had that very death warrant in his possession, sealed his fate. They executed him. if you look at my notes, I was like, you see all the lines and arrows everywhere? I was all over the place with this. All over the place. I'm just gonna read off the notes that I have for these three guys, and then like we'll just move on. Um, let's see. I don't know why I wrote that. Colonel Hacker was on the side of Parliament, but his whole family were royalists. His brothers fought for the king on the royalist side. Uh, One Hacker brother died in battle, and another lost his hand in service. Colonel Hacker would have been given immunity for his role in the execution of the king under the Indemnity and Oblivion Act. But then, while he was on trial, they literally found the actual death warrant of the former king in his possession. So they hung him. Colonel Hercules Hunks saved himself by giving evidence against Hacker and another fellow named Daniel Extel, and for his refusal to sign the death warrant. When he refused to sign it, Oliver Cromwell called him a forward, peevish fellow and forged his name down for him. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Peary escaped punishment by marrying the daughter of Sir Thomas Herbert, who was a prominent guy, so that was probably really helpful to him. Actually, I think that guy might have even been in exile with Charles II or helped him while Charles II was in exile. His second wife, Elizabeth, was the king's personal attendant during his imprisonment and execution, which probably worked in his favor too, because she probably had a really good relationship with the king before he got executed, which probably mattered a lot to Charles II. Maybe this is all speculation. Maybe. But I'm sure both of those facts really worked in his favor, because everyone else was executed who had that direct of a participation with the execution, except for the dude who snitched. And again, it goes to question if he actually ever really signed the death warrant anyway. Hacker was hung at Tyburn Gallows on October 19, 1660. I read this yesterday. This warrant was signed by all the members who sat as judges upon his trial, and the most of whom witnessed the carrying out of the sentence. In the discharge of this important and delicate duty, the most reliable officers and the best disciplined troops were selected, which placed John Fenwick among the first of these in the army about London at that time. The religious status of John Fenwick during this period is doubtful and contradictory. While he was with the army, he became a convert to the opinions of George Fox, and by a certificate dated February 11th, 1649, he is shown to have been a member of the Independents and a denomination of Christians more Presbyterian than the Quaker. Be that as it may, he eventually adopted the principles and practices of Friends and adhered to them until his death. Many of the soldiers in the army of the Commonwealth regarded praying and psalm singing as consistent with carnal warfare and believed that the sincere observance of the one added force and prowess to the other. Among the parliamentaries to any, we'll continue that in a second. George Fox, pretty much the father of the Quaker Friends, actually came to America a few times before Fenwick and before William Penn came to America. And he had obviously had a big hand in the Quakers colonizing Pennsylvania and New Jersey. He had a very, very, very close relationship with William Penn. William Penn and John Fenwick actually have a pretty interesting relationship with each other, as we'll discover over our research. Right now, it seems to me that they kind of had this relationship that went up and down with each other. There's different times where Fenwick felt like he was wronged by William Penn. The last 10 years of his life, he spent many of those years claiming that William Penn gypped him, robbed him out of what was his. But then by the time Fenwick dies, he leaves the guardianship of his grandsons in the care of William Penn. It's definitely a lot of back and forth. George Fox had a lot of had a few meetings with Oliver Cromwell and was putting him on to like some of his beliefs and stuff. And that's probably where, see, in this book, I'm pretty sure he's trying to insinuate that through these meetings that George Fox and Oliver Cromwell had with each other and their conversations about the Friends and the Quakers, that's kind of where the inspiration came to John Fenwick, which is there's probably some truth to that, and that was probably the case for a lot of soldiers who converted to being a Quaker. But I discovered that one of the properties, or there was an estate that was in the possession of Major John Fenwick. Maybe it was on behalf of someone. I can't remember the details right now, but it was a young girl. And that young girl ended up being William Penn's wife later in life. I think John Fenwick was like 30 years older than William Penn. So if you exclude the George Fox having these meetings with the New Model Army and Oliver Cromwell and all of that, John Fenwick still would have had a connection to William Penn and a relationship with him. And I believe that this estate that I'm talking about with the future wife of William Penn, I think this was through a connection with his second marriage, which we will get into in a little bit anyway. I think this next page is pretty boring. I could, if I remember it correctly. Important military undertaking, religious exhortations was a leading feature. Although the strictest discipline was enforced, yet the zealots in the army were allowed to proclaim their fanatical views and impress upon the soldiers that they were doing God's service. Subordination was complete, no duty was too erroneous, and no service too dangerous. Whether Major Fenwick was a participant in these military devotions does not appear, but it is patent that he ranked among the best and enjoyed the confidence of those around him. No means are at hand to follow him through the protectorate to the restoration of the old regimen under Charles II in 1660. It is probable he held some civil position under the government for which his legal knowledge rendered him capable, but not of sufficient importance to make prominent his name. After the return of Charles, he doubtless accepted the act of indemnity and saved his person and estate from molestation. Okay. I want to say something about this. This is basically saying, okay, right here. It says, but it is patent that he ranked among the best and enjoyed the confidence of those around him. Take note of that. And here it's saying how, like, he was solid through the Commonwealth era. And then he was still solid when King Charles II restored the crown under the Immunity Act. And then take note of right here when it says, it is probable he held some civil position under the government for which his legal knowledge rendered him capable, but not of sufficient importance to make prominent his name. What I discovered last night was that his father was in that parliament that was all had a hand in negotiating and restoring the crown. So that I really feel like worked in his favor. But if you take these two notes and this information here, this is what I make of it. It's kind of like if you take it to street culture, it's like sometimes you have that person who's like just like a cool person and pretty chill and like follows the rules and is a stand-up character. But they're not like actually a gang member of any particular gang. They're not like a valid gang member, but they're cool with all the gang members, you know? So like they're like an associate. Like they're cool with everyone, so they're stamped, they're solid. But they're not actually like part of any solid thing. So like their name isn't like they're good, but it's not legit. Like they're not legitimately this thing. And I think that's what the case was for like Major John Fenwick. He knew the right people. He had family in the right places. He was, you know, a confident guy. He knew, you know, he had a degree in law. He was part of a cavalry regiment in the army. He was part of all these big things that were happening politically around him. So he was cool enough and smart enough and socially accepted enough at a certain level to have some respect and social status, but not enough to really like be a big name in history. a much bigger, like the rest of these characters that we're talking about. Tracing him to this time from an historical and genealogical standpoint, his career will now be considered in connection with the purchase of, removal to, and settlement in West New Jersey. It is proper here to say that his wife Elizabeth had deceased, leaving him three daughters, Elizabeth, Anne, and Priscilla. He subsequently, and before this period, married Mary Burdett, a blood relation of his own, as they were cousins to Edward and Sir Francis Burdett. By this marriage there was no issue. The tradition connected with his paternity and passed through so many generations, accepted by some and rejected by others, should be considered here. To say that he was not a half-brother to Charles II, King of England, would perhaps be assuming too much, although nothing appears to prove the affirmative of this assertion. This part here is bullshit. He wasn't the second. He wasn't a half brother to Charles II. Excuse me. And this is another example of what this author was talking about in the beginning of the book, where like things get stretched, untrue things just dilute the true story, and it's all in hopes of like adding more significance or more excitement to the story. I'm sure it was probably rumors at some point in some places for one reason or another, but it's not true, and there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Being married to his second wife, being married to his second wife, being related to his second wife as a distant cousin, not a big deal, not uncommon. I want to, before I... Damn, I gotta like... I wrote a whole page of notes. That ended up just being wrong. Because that whole... Where I just was on page 12... This whole cousin thing and trying to link all the family members to... It was such a mess. And I had it... I spent like a whole hour on it, and by the end of it, I had everything wrong, and I just fucking gave up on it. And I'll just redo it again one day. But back on page 11 real quick, I want to just read my notes that I have for that. Let's see, at this point we can speculate that Fenwick was on the Presbyterian side kind of through the 30s and 40s and converted to independent during the war, and then Quaker after the war sometime in the 50s. The religious status of Fenwick during the period is doubtful and contradictory. He became a convert. Okay, that's all notes from the page. A certificate dated February 11th, 1649, after the king is killed, showing him being a member of the Independents. More Presbyterian than Quaker. Independents wanted state politics and authority to stay out of the church and have the right to worship freely. Supported the Civil War heavy. After the restoration of the crown, former royalists in parliament made it so non-conformants could no longer hold political or military office and prevented them from receiving degrees at Cambridge and Oxford. A lot of these folks were the folks that came to North America. Um, I forget what it was. The Putney debates is actually where, and I discovered that on my own down a rabbit hole. Um, I think this is where Fenwick actually met George Fox. The Putney debates, which took place from 28th of October to the 8th of November in 1647, were a series of discussions over the political settlement that should follow Parliament's victory over Charles I in the First English Civil War. The main participants were senior officers of the New Model Army who favored retaining Charles within the framework of a constitutional monarchy, and radicals such as the Levelers who sought more sweeping changes, including one man, one vote, and freedom of conscience, particularly in religion. So, yeah, these I'm pretty sure it was at these debates where George Fox and John Fenwick met formally. Um, Also maybe where George Fox began counseling Billings and his wife that was about to get divorced. Edward Billings, that was actually the guy. He's the reason John Fenwick got involved with New Jersey to begin with. There it is. John Fenwick may have owned the estate of Mary Springnet, his wife's cousin, as I said, and the mother of, I can't read that name. Oh, it was her daughter that was the future wife of William Penn. Gulielma. I'm not sure how to say that. But Fenwick's conversion would have took place somewhere in the 1650s. This is around the time that George Fox was meeting and conversing with Oliver Cromwell. I'm just skipping 12 and I think 13 is boring too, actually. Oh, so yeah, wait, yeah, 13 is. I mean, I don't even really feel like reading it. All right, I'm gonna zoom slow so you guys can read page 13. It's basically talking about this connection where John Fenwick is the half brother of King Charles II. Which, if you read this, it makes no sense to me actually, how they make that connection. Like the connection that I feel like they try to make on this page, if they were like they were distant cousins and this is how, like, this would make sense. But all of this mess just to say, like, this is why we think he might be this half brother. Like, no, there's one thing and one thing only that makes you a half brother, and that's having the same mom or having the same dad. Or maybe I'm just dumb and I am misreading this whole claim here. Now, right here's it's that save a legal distinction, the common father made him equal with Charles II, and the descendants of John Fenwick's daughters are infused with the same blood as the descendants of the recognized royal son, when in the same degree removed. You know what? I don't even know what I'm just not really digging this little part here. If if I had to call this anything, this is 1800s clickbait. The whole life of the founder of Fenwick Colony is prolific with material which, if clothed in the beauties of romance, would be at once interesting and attractive. Alright, now, this is 14. Okay. Now this is where it gets interesting again. Before referring to the several transfers of the territory in America called New Caesarea, there is manifest property in saying something of the persons and their history interested therein. John Lord Berkeley and Sir George Carteret were two of the persons who followed the second Charles of England into exile after the death of his father and during the Commonwealth. These are the two, as you're about to find out, the two guys that the Duke of York gifted land to, which made up West and East Jersey. John Lord Berkeley was an alright guy, and he actually sold his share to the Quakers, John Fenwick and Edward Billings, originally, which ended up broken down and in the hands of other people, other Quakers, and most of those shares going to William Penn. Sir George Carteret, I think, I forget which one of them were actually with him, and one of them actually, I think it was John Lord Berkeley who defended the Isle of Jersey, island in the English Channel. But what I can tell you is that Sir George Carteret was he had a lot to do with the Royal African slave trade. I think his company holds the record for the most transporting the most slaves between particular years to America. They adhered to his fortunes and remained faithful to his person. His adversities did not weaken their friendship. Adversities did not weaken their friendship, nor the dangers that surrounded him induced him to forsake his cause. Such attachments could not be disregarded, and these persons, among others, became the recipients of his favor. In the charter of Charles II, March 24th, 1663, to convey the soil and government of territory in America called Carolina, Berkeley and Carteret were among the guarantees, and in the words of the charter, being excited with a laudable and pious zeal for the propagation of the gospel, begged a certain country in the parts of America not yet cultivated and planted, and only inhabited by some barbarous people who have no knowledge of God, The purpose of the grantees are thus shown how far the expressed intentions of these men were carried out, or with what laudable and pious zeal they furthered their speculations, must be sought for in the history of those states, and need not be enlarged upon here. The whole Carolina thing. Let me read some of my notes for this page. Um, so March 24th, 1663, Charles II gives land. Um, this deed is actually online. We could probably look it up. New Caesarea or New Jersey, Nova Caesarea. That was like the original name of New Jersey. Um, Lord Berkeley spent a lot of time with James, Duke of York, during exile. So he was close with the Duke of York, which was Charles's brother, King Charles II's brother. And George Carteret had went with Charles II when he went into exile after the death of his father and during the Commonwealth period. So George Carteret was closer with Charles II, and John Lord Berkeley was closer with his brother, the Duke of York, James. June 24th, 1664, the Duke of York conveyed the tract of land Nova Caesarea to George Carteret and John Lord Berkeley, perhaps in the favor of King Charles II. Oh, so Sir George Carteret, he owned or was the owner, had some type of certain amount of shares in the or maybe even started the Royal Africa Company. Shipped 212,000 slaves between 1662 and 1731. According to data, maybe worst company of them all in that industry. 44,000 slaves died en route. The territory in America called Carolina, this was the March 24th, 1663 deed given by King Charles II. It was given to 8 people. The Carolina Charter, a document that granted land in North America to 8 noblemen that helped King Charles II back to the throne. All land between the 31st and 36th degree north latitude, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, which is roughly North and South Carolina. That was the land given to these 8 people. It's funny. I have a note in here for Edward Hyde and John Lord Berkeley. They were 2 of the 8 men that got a share in the Carolina Charter. They were enemies, and my note here is enemies over a bitch. They were fighting over a girl. Anthony Ashley Cooper, Sir George Carteret, Sir William Berkeley, Sir John Clement, Edward Hyde, George Monk, William Craven, and John Berkeley. The charter wasn't very successful, but some of the official starts the government and colonies in Carolina. It was the official, like, that charter is like the North Carolina and South Carolina government kind of like they count this as their start. In 1729, 7 of the 8 men sold their share to the crown Sir George Carteret was the only share not sold which was in the possession of his great-grandson John Carteret, 2nd Earl of Granville. He retained a 60-mile wide strip of land in North Carolina along the Virginia border called Granville District up until the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. New Jersey was a split colony until it went bankrupt in 1702, and the Crown took it back and reunited it. John Lord Berkeley sold his share to John Fenwick on March 18th, 1673 for £1,000. In other places, it states that Berkeley had issues politically with Carteret and Richard Nichols. What were those problems? ? Or was it just a money issue? ? The next year after this charter, the Duke of York conveyed to John Lord Berkeley and Sir George Carteret, June 24th, 1664, a certain tract of land in America, hereafter to be called New Caesarea or New Jersey, done no doubt by request of the king, and through his influence with his brother, the standing of these gentlemen before the public and in the responsible positions they held, if history be true, was certainly very questionable for the reasons hereafter stated. The first held an honorable place at court near the person of the king, but was detected in the basest corruptions and forced to resign his office. His intercourse with the Duke of York was also interrupted by similar transactions, and disgrace followed their exposure. The second was expelled from the House of Commons as a participant in the legislative bribery and other dishonest practices. Both were notorious for the peculations and breaches of faith wherever connected with the operations of the government. Although these persons deserved other and severer punishment, yet Berkeley was made Baron of Stratton in 1658, appointed Lord Lieutenant of Ireland in 1670, and Ambassador to France in 1674. Carteret was appointed Treasurer of Ireland, and continued in that position by the king while charged with the most disgraceful abuse of office. Public opinion could not influence his majesty against them, no matter how palpable the proof, for the reason that they had been faithful to him when it was beyond his power even to remunerate. I don't even know what that word says. Them for remunerate them for services already rendered. However commendable such sentiments may be in private life, they will receive condemnation when indulged into the injury of the government. At the time of the Restoration, John Fenwick had fully adopted the opinions and practices of George Fox and suffered much in person and estate therefore. In 1666, he was taken from a meeting of friends in Buckinghamshire and confined in the common jail. Okay, we're going to stop here. This is where I had stopped originally anyway. Like, my page 15 notes is so small. I have basically just the notes from this page that I just read. The king did not care about the public opinion of these two guys and rewarded them greatly when they were abusing their power, all because they were loyal to him in exile. Let's look up a couple things first before we jet out of here. Oh, I got a new follow. That's cool. It happened 40 minutes ago, but that's dope. Thank you for that follow. Uh, oh yeah, I want to look up some stuff. So let's check out a couple of these deeds because a lot of deeds we won't have access to later on. A lot of stuff is like in the possession of like historic societies or in private collections and shit. And you got to pay for copies and just to be able to see them. The first thing, let's check out. Let's check out the Carolina Charter of 1663. These are the men that I listed. The Carolina Charter of 1663 was a document that granted land in North America to 8 men and their heirs, making them the Lord Proprietors of Carolina. This is what I was trying to say. The Charter's provision became the basis for many of the principles of American freedom. The province of Carolina existed from 1663 until 1712, when the Carolinas were divided into North and South. The charter was signed by King Charles II on March 24th, 1663. I want to see a picture. Here we go. So that was the Carolina Charter. Look at Charles II trying to flex with his gorgeous hair and his sexy stash. Let's check out the I think it was called, let's see. I don't know how to pronounce this. Oh, that's not it. This was the deed, and look, your boy William Penn got his hands in it. This was what like separated West and East Jersey and like kind of like made things official. But I want to look up the Duke of York. June 24, 1664. June 24. There we go. Wait. What did I say? Oh, shit. There we go. Pretty fire. Hell yeah. So that gave the Duke of York, James, this is the deed that gives John Lord Berkeley and Sir George Carteret New Jersey. And then later on, that deed that I looked up before this one here, this was a deed that was done later to kind of iron some things out between West and New Jersey, or West and East Jersey rather. So we're all caught up. So the next time we stream, we're just going to be going page by page, and I like to just go through each line and research and look up like every little detail that it shares. And like, because like I said, a lot of times with this story, we're piecing together the story from all these other pieces that are all throughout all these other stories. So anyway, Merry Christmas to everyone.